I had no thoughts ever of wanting to go into the industry, but the story goes, of course, and it's true, that I used to share a flat with, still do, with David Spencer, my friend David Spencer, and also another actor by the name of Charles Kay. And we were three young chaps then. And they often used to rabbit on about how something good was on television, and I'd rabbit on how bad it was. And on one occasion they said to me, look, you're nothing to do with the business, don't be so clever. If you think you're so clever, go and write something yourself. So I did. I got so cross with them. And at that time my father was having a very bad time. He was he was on the London Underground as a ticket collector, and he had to leave after 47 years service because he had money. But they wouldn't give him a pension after all that time. So I went and often wrote a play, a radio play, about that, but not changing the setting and the person. And it was liked. It was given to a producer at the BBC Radio, and she loved it. And she said, the only thing is I don't like the ending. It's not a happy ending. We must have a happy ending. And I thought, oh God, that's typical of the BBC. So I went off and wrote the worst ending anybody has ever written, which is that the old man won the football pools. So he was able to do two fingers to them. But then the play went out live on a Saturday afternoon, and on the very afternoon that the play went out, my father won the football pools. He won 1,500, I think it was, on the football pools. And he became a kind of paparazzi star overnight. Poor old chap, going off to open the station up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there were the paparazzi waiting outside the front door, and he was the shyest man in the world, also a very inarticulate man, but a wonderful man. And they bought a caravan with it, and from that time on I decided to write another radio play. But I wrote 3, it was only a half-an-hour play, but it became such a huge success, and it's been done all around the world, which is extraordinary. But it happens to be of a theme that people can identify with, which is, injustice to ordinary people. Yes, there is. There's always something, even whatever the subject is, whatever the theme is, there's always something of me there somewhere. I have to be careful about what I say, don't I really? But no, there's always me there, and I think most writers are like that. That they bring in an element of themselves. And there's a wonderful actress that I used to know called Gwen Fancom Davies, very old lady, very famous actress, and she always said the most important thing to deal with in acting and in writing is truth. And I've tried very hard to follow that philosophy. And there's whatever people may say, they may criticise my writing, but they can't accuse me of not being truthful. The benefits of writing for radio are quite enormous. I've lectured on this, I've talked about this to young people and to older people too. I think it's the best way to actually start writing, because you invite your listener to be the people that you are projecting. It's the media of imagination. It's where you have to use your own imagination. It is your version of what a person looks like, of what a person is, what a person sounds like, and it's your own vision of them. So all those thousands of people have different ideas of what characters are like. But at the same time, it gives you a wonderful opportunity to explore anything. Radio will take you from sitting in a railway carriage to the moon. Now, you can't do that on television very easily without spending a bit of money. But radio can do that. It really is a wonderful, I was going to say an attack on your senses, an attack on your imagination, but it isn't. It makes you use your own imagination. You try sitting in a darkened room to listen to, well, I did, as you know, Night of the Wolf, a play. Turn the light off and listen, and those people are what you conjure them up to be. Radio is a wonderful literary medium to work in, and I've always loved it. I did. My next play was a little play again about, my people that I knew, a pub outing called the Beano, and the person who starred in that was in fact a very close friend of Charlie Chaplin, and he was in it, and that was very popular too. Then I put in another play called The Christening, but that was rejected, and so that wasn't done. But then I went on, as I started writing more, and I thought, it's getting a bit difficult to write plays in the middle of the night and then having to get up at 7 in the morning. So I eventually took some advice from a very dear friend of mine, a television producer called Cedric Messina. He said, I'll give you some extra work. I'll give you £5 a day, he said. £5 a day, and then you'll learn about television, you'll learn about this industry. And I did. And, as an extra, you sit around for hours and hours and hours doing nothing. But I watched and I observed, which all writers must do. And but I was writing radio plays in television studios. So I went on and I did quite a few plays. And I moved from that particular producer. Her name was Audrey Cameron, who gave me my first break. And I moved on to work with a senior producer at the BBC called John Tiedemann, who eventually became the head of drama at BBC Radio. And he was instrumental in helping me a great deal in learning my craft in radio, as indeed was David Spencer. David taught me from an actor's point of view, and John taught me from a producer's point of view. In radio, it's a producer rather than a director. And John then produced more things, got me to write more things for him, and I did. And eventually they were longer plays. So, and David was in several of them, and he was very good too. I suppose the slide was one of the most important things I'd done. I had never thought about doing science fiction before. It had never occurred to me. But like everybody else, I was very influenced by Journey into Space on radio some years before, and I loved things like Quatermass. But I had never thought about doing anything like that myself. I had enormous success with my other plays, about family life, because they had meant so much to me. But I don't know, I think the slide just came to me. I tell you how the slide came about. I've always had an inherent fear of earthquakes. I've been in a couple in my time around the world, and the thought of the earth trembling beneath me. There's a wonderful book, I think, called The Earth is Trembling or something, and I used a bit of that for research. And it always occurred to me how awful it would be. People always say, well, it's not here, it's there. But I'd always said to myself, what happened? What would happen if it happened in England? But then I said, no, it's ridiculous, you can't have earthquakes in England, until I did my research. And it was not until some years later, actually, after the slide, that, again, my friend David Spencer and myself, with our own company, we were going to do a program called Earthquake UK. And we had the cooperation of the Royal Seismological Society, I think, in Edinburgh. And they told us how many earthquakes there are in the UK each day. There are earth tremors. They take place all the time. And even at the time of writing the slide, I realised that earth tremors take place on the seabed in the English Channel. Now, I wonder how many people know that the Channel Tunnel has been made earthquake-proof, which it has. I never knew that, but I discovered. So at that particular time, I decided that it's a way of getting fears, your own personal fears, out of your system. And that's how the slide came about. I'm glad I did it because, so many people wrote to me, and I had wonderful, wonderful letters from blind people, which was extraordinary. A blind school girl who wrote from a blind school said she and her friends listened to it and they were absolutely terrified by it and said that this is what radio should be about, which is very sweet. It was the first time I'd worked with Miriam Margolyes, but then Miriam, of course, you see, was on the BBC Drama Repertory Company in those days, and so she was in a lot of people's plays. But it was the first time I realised what an absolutely incredible person she is, not only as an actress but as herself, and absolutely lovely to work with because she's enormous fun. But the one thing one must remember about Miriam is what a highly, highly intelligent woman she is. She really knows. And it was later on when David Spencer and myself had our television company, we were going to do a documentary programme about her own one-woman show, which was called Dickens Women. Now, Miriam is a great expert on Charles Dickens. She's done several of the feature films, including Little Dorrit. And she was, I think, the earlier Little Dorrit with Alec Guinness. But if you talk to Miriam, you're not talking to a fool. You're talking to someone who knows her business. She's a reader. She knows about literature. And what is so wonderful is she loves Dickens. And I was very, even in those early days, I was very proud to have her in it, even though it was only a very cliched sort of role for her. But it was still a part of the plot. Yes, Miriam's great fun, and I love working with her. Roger Delgado and Maurice Denham, of course, were two consummate actors, and I was very delighted to have them in there. Maurice I had only ever known through comedy shows on radio. When I was a youngster, he was in a wonderful sitcom on radio called Much Binding in the Marsh, and his laugh, which was was iconic, really, to listeners in those days. And he was like, but then later, he went into films. He was in The Purple Heart with Gregory Peck, playing a coward, and I suddenly saw Maurice in a different light. And when I met him, I thought, oh, there's a very different character here. But he was, Maurice had a great habit, I seem to remember at that time anyway, of suddenly scratching his neck. And so many times that I thought it's bound to upset his script or something. Because when you're in a radio studio, radio drama, trying to keep your script quiet is something. It's very, very difficult. And I know there are there's special paper that you can use that doesn't make such a noise. And I remember that from Maurice, but I talked to him quite a lot, and he was a very interesting man, a very ordinary man in many ways. And, if somebody had told me, without me having known him, that he was an actor, I would hardly have believed it. Roger Delgado, of course, was a very intelligent man. Of course, being the master in Doctor Who. But also, I'd known of him through, again, David Spencer, who had been auditioned for the role of the driver in From Russia with Love, the chauffeur. He didn't get it because he couldn't drive, but I think Roger was in it, and I think he took it over, and very sadly was killed during the filming of From Russia with Love. But David also was distantly related to Roger Delgado's cousin. His cousin was married to Roger Delgado. Talking to him, you realise that he had many broad interests. He liked reading, he liked good music, and he knew a lot about the business. Now, I'm not too familiar with his background, but I remember him being a deeply thoughtful person in the studio, and interrupting him would be a mistake when he was reading, because he used to read a lot in the green room. But if he was he was one of the few actors, and I mustn't say few, that's defamatory, but one of the actors who did his homework. And I haven't got any funny anecdotes about Roger Delgado, but I do remember him as somebody who knew far more than I did. And that's not going high.